All right, good morning, everyone. Um, First, let me thank the Land Trust Alliance for inviting me to be here today, and let me thank all of you for choosing to be here today to spend your morning here, because you could be anywhere, but you chose this room, and that choice does matter. We're gathered on the ancestral homelands of the Shawnee, the Miami, the Seneca, the Lenape, and many others. Land that holds memory, story, spirit, and the truth is this: these lands were taken, not borrowed, not freely given, taken. And that taking is not just history, it shapes who has land and who does not have land to this day. That's why this gathering matters, because we're not just here for another conference. We're here to learn, to listen, to build relationship, and because that's how real change begins. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't love microphones, crowds, and public speaking. You're probably asking, why is this guy up here then? But here's the truth, I do love Native people. And some things are bigger than my own comfort, and that's why I'm here. And I learned that lesson early. I was a teenager standing next to my aunt at protests that I barely understood. She handed me a sign and told me to walk, so I walked. We were protesting a road project near Haskell. For most folks, it was just a construction project, but for us, it was sacred ground. We knew there were unmarked graves there, children that were taken to Haskell when it was a residential school, and children who never came home. We estimated there were about 600 graves there that were unmarked. Even as a teenager, I could feel them there. The land carried their voices, the land remembers. To that day, I learned something that has never left me. Land isn't just earth and water. Land is memory, land is history, and land is a relationship, and with that relationship comes responsibility. And for Native people, land is identity. To be cut off from land is to be cut off from ourselves. So when we fight for land, we're fighting for memory, for justice, for our ancestors, and for those who aren't even born yet, the 7 generations. So with that, let me tell you who I am. My name is Jay Young. I serve as the co-executive director of the American Indian Center in Chicago. I'm Potawatomi Thunder Clan through my mother, and I'm Seneca Deer Clan through my father. Normally when I do these talks, I spend the first 10 minutes to introduce my family. I only have 10 minutes today, so I can't do that. When I do this, I use maps, I use photos, and I trace our journey from Kansas to Oklahoma, back to Kansas to Iowa, and finally to the Great Lakes, our ancestral homelands, especially to the place we call Chicago today. And I do that for a reason, because I want people to understand why my family is in Oklahoma today instead of Chicago, why we were removed again and again. My family alone went through 4 removals. And that's the story for most Native nations, especially those east of the Mississippi. Removal is the story. You've all heard of the Trail of Tears, but how many have heard of the Potawatomi Trail of Death? How many have heard of the 12 plus removals that Potawatomi alone went through? That silence, that's part of the story. Those removals you've never heard of are the ones that shaped my family. And it wasn't just us. Here in Ohio, there are no federally recognized tribes, but more than 45 nations have ancestral ties to this land. And when I say removal, I don't mean all at once, I mean in waves. And each wasn't just about land. Each was an attempt to remove who we are, our identity as people, and each left scars on land, on families, on languages, and on our spirits. And yet 4 removals later, we're still here and we're still Native. But here's what that means today. In Chicago, the American Indian Center, we don't own a single acre of land, not one. If I want to hold a powwow at the lake, I have to apply for a permit. If I want to harvest cedar, I have to ask the forest preserve for permission, wait for someone else's rules, and on their timeline. Our food sovereignty program that we run, we grow it on borrowed land because we don't own any. For every fire, every song, every prayer, it's borrowed space and borrowed time. That is what it means to be an urban Native today. And asking permission to simply be Native does not feel good. And here's the contradiction that we live with. We're told again and again that we are people of the land. Our stories tell us this, our ceremonies tell us this, our elders carry this truth. But in the cities, we have no land to live out who we're supposed to be. And that contradiction carries losses for us. It's the loss of knowledge when children can't gather medicines. It's the loss of ceremony when prayers meant for the earth are pushed into gymnasiums. It's the loss of language when words tied to plants and rivers fade. It's the loss of belonging itself to walk through our homelands and feel like outsiders on the very place that should hold us. And these aren't just environmental losses, they are identity losses, because for Native people, land is not a cause, it's who we are. For many of you, caring for land is a calling, maybe even a career, and I honor that. But you can set that work down and still be who you are. For us, there's no setting it down. And let's be very clear, Those losses didn't happen by accident. They happened alongside a system that now says we're saving the land. But save for whom? Saved how? Who chose the baseline? Who decides which plants return, where fire is used? Who writes the rules for gathering medicines on our homelands? Who determines those metrics? Settler ecology shows up in those decisions. Baselines picked without us. Methods chosen without traditional ecological knowledge. Access rules that make gathering at best inconvenient, at worst illegal. Metrics that count anchors and species, but not ceremonies, not elders' teachings, not children harvesting. You can't restore a prairie while excluding the people who tended to it. You can't bring back the oak savanna while sidelining the knowledge that kept it alive for generations. You can't talk about native species while locking out native people. If conservation protects plants but not the people who carried them for generations, is that really conservation, or is it just another form of removal? And let me be clear, conservation without native people is not protection, it's possession with a green logo slapped on top. But there is another path. In my Potawatomi teachings, we carry what's called the Seven Fires Prophecy. It tells us this: in the time of the seventh fire, we will face two paths. One is well-worn, dark, scorched earth, destructive. The other is harder to see, but it's green and it's alive. That's the path of healing. We are living in the time of the seventh fire now, and a new generation is rising up, picking up what was broken, remembering what was lost and almost erased. And that prophecy says if we choose the right path, a new people will emerge. The eighth fire will be lit. But if we choose the other path, the path of destruction, the land will keep burning. The waters poison, the people lost. That choice is before us now. So what does it look like choosing the green path? It looks like Native people having a say in baselines, methods, access, and metrics. It looks like TEK standing beside Western science. It looks like ceremony and medicine as rights, not as favors. It looks like land return where possible and true co-stewardship where it cannot be returned. Because real partnership isn't a checkbox called consultation, it's called co-creation. And if I have to ask permission every time I want to gather, every time I want to pray, every time I want to teach our children, then that's not a partnership. That's dependency dressed up as collaboration. And so I ask you, how many of you work with tribes? Many of you, I know, and that's important, but how many of you work with urban natives in cities? Because that's the majority of us. And let me be clear, if all you're doing is working with tribes, you're missing most native people. Only about 1 in 4 of us live on reservations. The rest, 3 out of 4, we live in cities or off reservations in places like Chicago or Cleveland. In Chicago, we estimate there are about 100,000 native people in the Chicagoland area, representing more than 160 nations. And that's why urban native centers like the American Indian Center exist, to make sure ties to land and culture, to community don't disappear, to make sure that when we talk about partnership, we're not leaving out the majority of our people. If we choose the path of the seventh fire, we're choosing a relationship. If we choose justice, then the eighth fire will be lit. And what does that look like? It looks like prairies where children gather medicines with their grandparents, forests where fire is tended by those whose songs have carried it for centuries and generations, waters where elders teach the language of the river, not just in books, but by standing on the banks. That's the future we can choose. And I'll end it with this. As a teenager, I stood in wetlands with that sign in my hands. I knew it mattered. Today, I know the same. Our choices still matter. And together, we can choose the path that heals our people and heals the land. Thank you.